Okay, so here we've got the heart, and I've labeled the four chambers. So remember that each of the chambers of the heart can fall into one of two categories. It's either an atrium, plural atria, or a ventricle, and plurals ventricles. Right? The atria are where the heart is going to receive blood, and the ventricles are going to be where the heart pumps out blood. Okay, so right, left. Remember that when we talk about anatomy in general, you always use the perspective of the patient that you're looking at. So, well, this is going to be my right, or if you're looking at it, you're seeing this right, and you're seeing left here. Remember that if this was a person looking at you, this would be their left and their right. So when we label things in anatomy, you label it using that patient's perspective. So right atrium, left atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle. So we'll start here and we'll trace the path of blood out of the heart and back. Okay, so right, the left ventricle is going to be the biggest of the four chambers of the heart, and that's because it kind of needs to pump blood through the body. Right, so it needs to establish a pretty significant pressure, your blood pressure, so that blood can kind of get everywhere that it needs to go. All right, looking at it that way, right, the first thing that the ventricle pumps into is going to be actually the aorta. So, right, this arrow is going to represent the aorta. So the aorta is going to eventually branch out and become arteries and kind of split off as it goes to different parts of the body, but it starts out. That first blood that leaves enters the aorta, and it's going to eventually go to the body. This funny little thing that I've drawn right here represents a capillary bed. So aorta is the fattest artery in the body, and it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually it becomes something called a capillary. The capillaries are going to be the thinnest blood vessels that you have in your body, and that's going to be where gas exchange occurs. So remember, the reason that this whole thing's happening is because your body needs oxygen, and it needs to get rid of carbon dioxide. So this is red because it's rich in oxygen. When it gets to these capillary beds in the bodies, and this would be everywhere from your skin to your liver to your kidney to your brain, etc., that whatever tissue or whatever organ that is going to suck up all the oxygen and drop off all of its carbon dioxide. Right. What results is you get blood that no longer has lots of oxygen in it, and that's why we label it blue. So this is sort of we could say this is the arterial side. And what we have now here is the venous side of this sort of cycle. Okay, so here we said we had blood that was high in oxygen and it was low in carbon dioxide. Well, that reverses, and now we have blood that is low in oxygen and it is high in carbon dioxide. Remember, the body's using that oxygen to burn glucose so that it can make energy. When it makes energy, it releases this carbon dioxide. Okay, so we send this blood all the way back to the heart. Here you had a fat sort of artery, the aorta, and there's actually I guess I don't want to say fat, but there's a thicker or a larger vein on the venous side. There's two of them. They're called the inferior and superior vena cava. So these words sort of give away the purpose of each of these, right? There's only one aorta, but the inferior vena cava is sort of draining all the blood that came from the lower half of the body, and the superior vena cava is draining all the blood that came from the upper half of the body. And again, this is all blood that's been used and drained of its oxygen. That's why it's blue. So this right atrium, right, still low in oxygen, and it's going to pump blood directly into the right ventricle, and the right ventricle is going to send it back out again. Okay, so here's the question, right? This is low in oxygen, but for it to be used again, we need to replenish it with oxygen. So where does this blood need to go? Hopefully, the answer's obvious to you, and that is it goes to the lungs. All right, so here it goes to the lungs. So this is, again, could say this is oxygen poor blood that we send to the lungs, and the lungs where we get sort of the opposite sort of gas exchanges as the one that occurred in the body. Oxygen kind of floods the blood and all that carbon dioxide leaves since it's just waste. And now we have oxygen rich blood. Okay, this part right here is together called the pulmonary circuit. Okay. I think in a previous video I stated that, right, arteries leave the heart and veins go towards the heart. So here you have the pulmonary artery taking blood from the right ventricle to the lungs, and here you have the pulmonary vein taking blood from the lungs to the left atrium. So so many students love to say that that arteries carry oxygenated blood and veins carry deoxygenated blood. When we're talking about the blood that's going to and from the body, that's correct. But remember that these pulmonary arteries and veins have the opposite, or just the opposite. And so that's why I always tell students to look at arteries and veins in terms of the direction that they're headed and not what's inside of them. All right, so pulmonary circuit. Going back, if this circuit from the left ventricle to the right atrium, we call the systemic circuit. Okay, all right, so remember, if you want to summarize it, right? Left atrium, aorta, capillary beds of the bodies, inferior superior vena cava, right atrium, right ventricle. Then we go to the lungs via the pulmonary artery, get replenished with oxygen, head back to the heart through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium, which sends it right back into the left ventricle, and then we're out again. All right, I guess the next thing that we're going to do is sort of explore specifically the gas exchange that occurs here in the lungs, and then the gas exchange that occurs at capillary beds in the body.